So thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. Before I get started, just to help me understand you all, make sure I can deliver some value to you, raise your hand if you are in sales or marketing. Okay, so it's almost every single person in the room, so that's good. That will help. Raise your hand if you have been a lifetime sales and marketing person. Adult career, I don't know if anybody's going to get really specific about lifetime. Okay, good. All right, so raise your hand if you've ever been called coin-operated. Never? Come on, you're kidding me. All right, we'll come back to that. Okay, so let me ask you a question. As sales and marketing people, what's your why? Why do you do what you do? Why are you in sales? There's no right, there's no wrong, but I am curious why you do what you do. So put this in the back of your mind, let it percolate a little bit as we go through. Think about what your why is. And I'd also ask you to think about, does it line up with when you started your career, when you went into sales? Did you go into sales saying, I want to be able to create value for people. That's why I want to be a salesperson. Or did you say, oh no, I knew I wanted to make money and sales is the way to make money. Again, there's no judgment, there's no right or wrong in any of this. So think about that as we go through. So a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. I am definitely not here to tell you how to sell. I'm not a salesperson. Yes, I've started lots of companies, and in every single one of them, I was the first salesperson, so I've done lots of sales. But you all know sales better than me. You're professionals at this. I'm not going to tell you how to do your jobs. However, I would like to throw some things out there and bring up some ideas that hopefully will challenge your way of thinking. Right? I'm a big believer that bringing different perspectives in and challenging the way we think will help you think bigger, better, more broadly. Diversity is good, right? Diversity of thought is a good thing. And I'm going to speak in very broad strokes. So I may say some things that you say, that's completely irrelevant to my situation, therefore it's wrong. Well, that first part is fine. It may be irrelevant to your situation, doesn't mean it's wrong. So just know we're talking broad strokes here, okay? All right, so who the hell am I? Why am I standing up here talking to you? In particular, because I already told you I'm not a salesperson, so why am I talking? Okay, so way back in the day, I got a Ph.D. in psychology, right? That seems like the natural linear path to being a CEO. Go get a Ph.D. in psychology. So I did that, and actually while I was in graduate school, this is going to date myself, I was in graduate school at a time when I had to convince my students, so I was teaching, doing research, et cetera, to activate their school email addresses. And they were saying, why in the world would I need this, right? So that's how long ago it was. But during that time, I started to create websites for my classes. There were no systems to do this, so I learned HTML and started putting my classes online. Basic things, syllabus, office hours, but then I started adding things like definitions of terms, because my students would say to me, hey, I was a little confused by this thing we studied in class today, so I went to the textbook, and that confused me way more. I'm really confused by this. Why can't people just talk in regular English as opposed to psychological jargon? So I said, all right, I can do that. And I started writing definitions of things and talking about theorists and what have you on my websites that I created just for my students. And as I got towards the end of my PhD, I said, you know, this thing that I created, I actually think this could be a business because this internet thing is going to be a thing, right? People were saying, well, maybe, maybe not. But I thought, this internet thing will be a big thing, and I'd like to be a part of it. So I started this company, provided educational resources for college students. And to show you how smart I was and how much I knew about business, because I had no idea how to fund this thing, I said, what I could do is I could start another business that would be cash flow heavy, and I would use the cash from that to fund the real business that I wanted to do, right? So this is how smart I was. I had no idea about VCs or investors or any of this stuff. So I actually started a business that I hired a bunch of high school students that knew a lot about computers, and I sent out flyers to one neighborhood that basically said, you just got a computer, you have no idea what to do with it. Any problem you have, call this number, we'll come to your house and we'll fix it, right? And put out some flyers. I got home and the phone never stopped ringing because everybody said, I just got this computer. I don't know how, I'm supposed to put antivirus software in there. I don't know what the hell that is, and I don't know how to put it in there. Can you people come out and just do it for me? Sure. Simple, basic things like that, and it just took off, right? Couldn't keep up with it. I'm hiring more high school students. I'm going out on weekends and doing repairs. I had no idea what I was doing, not at all. I'm like, oh, I got it, don't worry about it. I'm calling my high school students, I'm like, how do I fix this thing? So it was great, it was great. And then I met up with these guys that had just started Blackboard. Raise your hand if you know Blackboard, the education company. Okay, great. And they said, you know, that education website that you created for psychology, we want to do that for every single subject matter that we're going to cover, and we want to start moving towards the web. We're software-based, we want to start doing things on the web. So can you create content like you did for psychology for every subject matter that we'll cover? I said, how many subject matters are you going to cover? And they said, 253. And I said, not a problem. It was just me. I was the only person writing all this stuff for the education website. So one thing led to another, and they said, forget that, why don't you just join the company and let's build this together. So I joined Blackboard when it was a startup. I was there for a few years, left there, moved down here, and started a series of companies. My last company, TransLoc, some of you may know, it was actually started at NC State. I became CEO of it. And in January of 2018, we sold to Ford. We raised one round of funding and then sold to Ford. And as of August, I am no longer the CEO of the company. Now I'm a gentleman landowner. I bought a bunch of land and closed on that on August 15th. My last day of work was August 16th, and I went right to the land and started driving a tractor and figuring out how to use a chainsaw without cutting my arm off. So that's what I do. We'll talk a little bit more about some of the TransLoc stuff in Blackboard, but that's me. I think the Blackboard story and some of the TransLoc story, as salespeople, you'll find interesting because they were super fast growth opportunities there and experiences that I think hopefully you'll take a few things away from. All right, so I'm going to deviate a little bit from sales, and I want to talk about business for a little bit. Business. By the way, before I dive into this, was anybody at the Red Hat Agile Day? Excellent, because I was a keynote speaker and I'm repurposing slides that I used there. So for you, it's all brand new. All right. Brave New Work by Aaron Dignan. In the spirit of good artists borrow and great artists steal, I'm ripping everything off from Aaron. He's a great guy. He's perfectly fine with me doing this. If you haven't read this book and you have any interest in business and how organizations are built and operate, old school, new school, et cetera, I think this is the best book I've read. So I highly encourage you to get it and then write a nice review on Amazon if you liked it. Okay, so org chart. What year do you think this org chart is from? And I purposely grayed out or blurred out text so you couldn't figure out titles and things. What year? 2002.
2010.
2010.
Last week.
Last week. I see a trend. We're getting closer to today. Today. Oh, that was good. Well done. This is actually Northern Pacific Railway from 1910. 1910. And the only three answers I got were relatively new, right? Relatively recent. Could have been today, but it's from 1910. And the reason I show that is because organizations are still designing themselves and operating in ways that could be 100, 150 years old, okay? So tell me if any of these things sound familiar to you. Maybe they're part of your organization now, or you've been in companies that have them. So for example, insist on doing everything through channels. Never permit shortcuts to be taken. When possible, refer all matters to committees. And by the way, the committee should never be less than 5 people, right? Haggle over precise wordings of communications. Insist on perfect work in relatively unimportant products. refer back to matters decided upon at the last meeting. So we decided on this last meeting, we should probably rethink this, and maybe we should make another decision in this meeting. Sound familiar to anybody? So this is actually verbatim from the CIA's handbook for sabotaging other nations. They put this together in the 40s and gave it out as propaganda to citizens of other countries who were sympathetic to the United States. And they said, if you do these things, go back to your companies, do these things, it will completely destroy productivity. Your economy will just grind to a halt. Scientifically designed to F up your companies. And these sound a lot like what's going on today, right? Right? We've all seen it. It was not a joke. It should be a joke, but it's not. So another factor that's going on in business today is something that you may have heard referred to as microwave capitalism, right? Microwave capitalism. So I was just speaking at Duke, at Fuqua, to an impact investing class. And one of the things we talked about was terms, right? So VCs, they want their money back in a certain period of time. They invest, and they want it back in 5 years or 7 years or 10 years, whatever it is. It's pretty short, right? Pretty short period of time. And it creates this mentality of money in, money needs to come back very quickly. And if you want to build a big, sustainable business that's doing good for the world, it's pretty hard to do it in those terms. But those are the expectations now, right? Go out to Silicon Valley, everybody wants a unicorn in like 5 years, right? So microwave capitalism, and if you've ever used a microwave, not much good tasting stuff ever comes out of a microwave. So it used to be that if your company went public, if you were lucky enough, fortunate enough, did great enough work that you could bring your company public, it might be a publicly traded company for 50 or 60 or more years. Nowadays, speaking of microwave capitalism, if you get your company public, the average lifespan is 10 to 12 years. 10 to 12 years. Companies are generating lots of money, but their returns are way less than they used to be. The value that they deliver is way less than they used to be. The sustainability is way less than it used to be, but they're certainly generating a lot of money, right? I mean, Uber, that was valued at $70 billion at one point, right? And went public. And how long are they going to be publicly traded? I don't know. But all things that are happening in business. And of course, I probably don't have to tell you this one about low employee engagement. When you have companies that operate in microwave capitalistic ways, your employees are probably not all that thrilled, right? So Gallup does this study every few years, maybe every year. The last one, 2018, survey results showed that only 53% of employees are engaged. Only 53% are engaged. Sorry, 34% are engaged. That's it, 34% are engaged. 53% are not engaged, right? Which means they've basically got one foot out the door. I will not ask you to raise your hand and say how many of you are open to new business opportunities, even though you have a job currently, but maybe. And 13% are disengaged. And disengaged means they are actively working against the company. 13% of people want to screw your company up. 53% don't really care to stick around anymore, right? Business is not going well. And here's another problem. I'm just layering on problems. I'm the bearer of good news, right? How many of you know Milton Friedman, have heard of this shareholder value, right? I quote, "There's one and only one social responsibility of business, to use its resources to increase its profits." That's the only reason business exists, according to Milton Friedman, and he won a Nobel Prize, by the way. And this is the way business has operated for, I don't know, most of eternity. I mean, there's good news. You may have heard, I'm sure most of you are familiar, that 200 CEOs recently of big companies signed the stakeholder agreement and said, this shouldn't exist. We should be focusing on our stakeholders, which include employees and our customers. It's not just to make money for our shareholders. And what's interesting about this is it got really popularized by Jack Welch. And ironically, Jack Welch actually said, on the face of it, shareholder value is the dumbest idea in the world. And yet, he was quoted somewhere as saying how great it was, and it was taken out of context. And all through, there was like an entire decade where all they did was talk about how shareholder value is so important. And look, one of the greatest CEOs of all time says it's the best thing ever, and he kept saying it's the dumbest thing ever, and yet, there you go. So why am I telling you all of this stuff? Well, for one thing, business is stuck in a time warp. It is. Business is stuck in a time warp. You saw that org chart. Could have been from 125 years ago, but we thought it was from today. We're still doing the same crap over and over again and expecting different results from an organizational perspective. Well, what about sales? Right? Vince and I were just talking before this, and he said, sales is basically the same as it's been far back as we can remember. Right? Can I solve a problem? I got a product that solves your problem. Agree on a price, you buy it. It's basically the same thing. So my question to you is, are you stuck in a time warp? If you are stuck in a time warp, like these companies that you saw, their average lifespan, even though they go public, which means they're successful, is diminishing day by day. If you're stuck in a time warp, I would say your chance of survival is probably going down day by day as well. But let's talk about that a little bit more. All right, so we love these terms, B2B, B2C, B2G. I hear these things all the time. People say to me, and when I was at TransLoc, we would hire people, and they would say, well, I'm really good at B2C, and I've done a bunch of B2B, but you're in B2G mostly, and I've never done B2G, and I'm really worried. Oh my God, and I hear our salespeople would talk about it. Well, we've got to find people that are experts in B2G, or they can't really sell. Okay. Honestly, I think that's all crap. I think it's all P2P. It's all person to person. Person to person, right? And this is going to be kind of a theme going forward to my bold statement that if you really want to make the most money, you got to stop thinking about money and you got to start thinking about people. And it's easy to say, right? Joe Girard. Anybody know Joe Girard? A couple of people. All right, well, you're students of sales history. So Joe Girard is in the Guinness Book of World Records as the #1 salesperson in the world. The greatest salesperson of all time. I'm not saying that. Guinness Book of World Records is saying that. Why is he considered the greatest salesperson of all time? He sold an average of 6 cars a day every single day he worked his entire career. Do you know how hard it is to sell a car? Has anybody here been in car sales? You're smart. Holy crap, that's got to be so unbelievably hard, which is why people just go to the internet. No one ever wants to go in and even talk to a salesperson anymore. It's aversive, and yet 6 a day through an entire career. So how did he do that? So, starts with trust and empathy. So these are quotes from Joe. He said, people buy people, not things. If you sell a commodity, I can get whatever you sell from 2, 5, 20, 100 other salespeople. Why am I buying from you? Right? People like to buy people. This is from someone that worked with Joe Girard. Joe would have 3 to 4 mechanics rush out anytime one of his customers came in that needed his car service. They'd pull in, 3 to 4 mechanics would rush out and start immediately working to service Joe's customers. Just like that. Right? So that occasionally he would even pay for some of the parts himself. That actually is reducing his money, reducing his take-home. Why would he do that? Because he plays the long game. Joe plays the long game. It's much harder to play the long game, but I would argue there's a lot more money in the long game. Okay? Once someone bought from me, I service them to death. Sale is not the end of the party, it's just the beginning. Too many in sales forget that. These seem so obvious, right? It's so basic, and yet so few salespeople do this. I know because I've worked with lots and lots and lots of salespeople, and they say this all the time. customer first. I care about customer. I want to make sure we have the right product for them, so they're going to have a great experience. And then as soon as that deal's on the table, they just want to close that deal. And I can't tell you how many times I've said, this actually doesn't seem like it's a good deal for them. I actually think there's a product, one of our competitors, that would work better for them. And the looks I get on those faces, it's like I have 10 heads, right? It's like, well, you told me the customer is the most important thing, and if we're going to sell them an inferior product, how can they be the most important thing? People in relationships. So I think Joe might be most famous for this. If you ever bought a car from him, each month you would receive a postcard from Joe with a little handwritten note on it. And it only said 3 words. I like you. Joe Girard. Now remember, he sold 6 cars a day over a lifetime. And he was sending these postcards every month to everyone that ever bought from him. Ever. And when asked about this, he said, everybody likes to be liked. So I send the postcards, and people know that I like them. It builds a relationship with them. They remember me because I get this every month, and I sold them 1 car, and guess what? Now I'm going to sell them another car, and another car, and another car, and another car. So from my perspective, if you really want to make a lot of money, not just this your quarterly quota, and not just crush it 1 quarter or 2 quarters, but over your entire career, to me, these are the keys. You must show empathy. This is the easy one to say and super hard to do, especially when money's on the line, right? You must be able to demonstrate to people that you can see things from their point of view and you understand where they're coming from. And I put in parentheses for these 2, real, because people bullshit these 2 all the time. All the time, right? Real empathy, real trust. So Joe did it. Every time that client pulled up with their car that needed to be serviced, people rushed out. And if they didn't have the money to pay for it, he paid for it himself. That builds trust. You do that once, sure, that's nice. But you do that twice, 5 times, over how many times over the course of 10 years? I can buy a car anywhere. I'm going to Joe. Every single time. You got to put people first. People, 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 people. Remember, what Joe said is people buy people. They are not buying what you're selling. They're not buying the product necessarily. And you got to think long term. I have seen so much short-term thinking. It is incredibly corrosive. It is destructive to companies. It is destructive to salespeople, because as soon as you start thinking anything long-term, these things start going away. You think short-term, these things go away. Let's talk more about that. So, are you going to be an old-school hunter that thinks about ABC, that thinks about coffees for closers? Remember, first prize is a Cadillac Eldorado. Second prize is a set of steak knives. Third prize is you're fired. And of course, only one thing counts in life. Get them to sign on the line which is dotted. It's old school. That's from the businesses that would go public and stay there for 60 years. You do that with the companies that are going public and staying there for 10 or 12, your career's short. Or do you want to be Joe Girard, the greatest salesperson ever, who cared about his customer, who exhibited empathy, he built trust over time, he thought long term, I'm going to have this customer and their families and their friends and everyone they know for the rest of my natural born life and continue to make money from them. I'm going to have happy customers. And by the way, don't we want to actually have some joy in our work? Right? And make much bigger money than this quarterly quota or this year's quota. And so I know some of you are thinking, but I know, insert a name of a person who only cares about closing and commissions and he's rich. So what do you have to say about that? That's a perfectly fair question. Here's what I would say. If that's what you care about, you will make money. There's no question. You can make money. You can make money. But you're going to miss opportunities. And you're probably going to miss the biggest, the best opportunities that are going to happen over and over time. You are more likely to do bad deals. And let me tell you something, if if you ever have the misfortune for working for me one day, and you keep doing bad deals, even though you are killing it, you might make more revenue and create more deal opportunities than anybody in the company. If you do bad deals, you will get fired. I do not care if you're the top producing salesperson. If you do bad deals, you're gone because you're actually hurting the company, you're hurting our brand, you're hurting our reputation, and you're hurting the customer. Okay? By the way, if what you care about is money, you better believe we can smell you coming. You better believe it, okay? Again, this is not about it's bad to make money. I want you to make money. I want you to make 10x what you've ever made before. But if that's your focus, people know, right? People know. You're gonna have higher churn, right? You know that it is much easier to sell to an existing customer than to have to go and get a new customer. You're salespeople, you know this better than anybody, and yet we continue to do bad deals that end up churning, and now I'm back to square one, making my sales life much, much harder. You work harder over time, and guess what? You're gonna be a jerk. People won't like you. You're gonna have less joy in your life, and you're gonna make less money. So by the way, I am not gonna use all of my time. We'll have plenty of time for Q&A, just so you know. All right, so let's talk about growth a little bit. So when I was at Blackboard, Blackboard was definitely a sales culture. Very, very strong sales culture. Didn't mean we didn't care about product, we did, but sales was key. And we had an amazing sales team, easily one of the best I've ever worked with in my life. They were fantastic. But one of the things we did is when we started moving from software to the web, came up with this approach where we said, let's give away Blackboard.com accounts. So we're gonna have a Blackboard.com, which didn't exist before. So we're gonna have a web-based product, and we're gonna give it away to individual teachers. So if you're teaching at a university, you could sign up right online for a Blackboard.com account. You got a course site, put your syllabus on there, do all of your stuff. But we were watching. And invariably, you would tell one of your colleagues in the department, hey, I'm trying this thing. Or they would say, what's that thing you're using? And I'd say, I'm using the Blackboard. And then they would sign up. And we were watching. And then a third one would sign up. And at that point, a salesperson would call the head of the department and say, hey, were you aware that you've got 3 faculty members using Blackboard to teach their classes? It seems like this might be an opportunity to talk about a license for your department, right? So we could have monetized every single one of those instructors individually, but we didn't because we said there's a much bigger opportunity. Give them away, give our best things away for free, let them experience it, and as it spreads, then we go to the people above them that actually can make financial decisions more easily than them and have more money, and we'll sell a license as opposed to an individual account. And then over time, we got smart enough, we said, why don't we do that at the next level up and start selling to the university as a whole? And then we got even smarter and said, why don't we sell to consortiums? Because consortiums actually can sell products to the entire region of universities or at the state level. And then we don't have to worry about individual universities making the decision. And then it just exploded from there. But up until that point, it was go close the deal, get a university on board. You know, it was like caveman talk. It was like kill and bring the meat back to the cave. That was the mentality. And it shifted to what's the bigger approach? What's the bigger strategy? And the salespeople made way more money. And trust me, it was hard at Blackboard. We made lots of mistakes and people hated us for some period of time. But overall, Blackboard became the dominant provider of education technology, in part because the product was really good. But in bigger part, I would say it was because we took this approach. Okay. All right, at TransLoc, there's a lot I can talk about at TransLoc in terms of sales, but one of the interesting things that we did is, so TransLoc started in 2004, bootstrap company. I became CEO in 2014. I went there in 2012, had no intention of being CEO, ended up becoming CEO in 2014. We raised an A round in 2016, okay? We lived on our revenue. We sold, brought revenue in, hired people, grew slowly. But best brand in the market, 10 years, we didn't lose one single customer. Talk about strong brand, right? That's great for an incoming CEO to hear, right? We've never lost a customer in a decade. Good luck. So, and we also never gave anything away for free, ever. And so we closed a round of funding, and shortly thereafter, I walked into our boardroom and I said to our board members, all those projections we made based on all this and that, why don't you forget about those for a little while? Because there's this need in the market. Data is going to be critical in transit. Public transit has no data, and what data they have is bad, and they're underfunded, and they can't do all this stuff, and they need it. If they want to be on Google Maps and Apple Maps, they have to take this massive amount of data and convert it into this ridiculous specification and load it to Google, and then Google tells you got 12,000 errors but doesn't tell you what they are. It's a mess. We can create the best product ever made to allow transit agencies to do this, which they need to do. They all know they need to do it. So it's going to be every transit agency in the world eventually. And what I think we should do is give it away for free. And that's exactly how CEOs get fired. And my board looked at me like I was crazy, and they said, just want to make sure I understand, everyone's going to need it, not even just want. They're going to need it. You've already built the product. It's the best one on the market by far, objectively speaking. That's what the market said. And you want to take resources away from the things that generate revenue to this thing and give it all away for free for an unknown period of time. Exactly. And why did we do that? We did that because we knew all the stuff I already said about data is going to be the most important thing, right? And data is super powerful. But we also knew that eventually we want to not only have the biggest impact in the world possible, that was number one, and getting this into the hands of more agencies would have more impact. But we also eventually needed to increase the value of the company. We're ultimately going to have an exit. We took people's money with the expectation we would return money eventually. Okay. And I said, no one's going to buy us for the amount we want because of our revenue. Wouldn't it be better if we get a strategic acquisition going, which will be worth way more money than if we try and just increase revenue? And that is exactly what happened. We got a strategic multiple for TransLoc, and we made much more money, including all the salespeople, than we ever would have made by continually trying to sell deals. One other thing that we did at TransLoc that I think salespeople, you'll get this really quickly. Public transit is, well, they're risk averse, right? They do not like to take risk at all. I understand a variety of reasons. So we came up with this product called microtransit, which we think will change a lot of the world, which basically takes transit agencies' smaller vehicles, like 8 to 10 or 12 person vans that you see running around. They're typically used for paratransit, right? So people who can't drive. And we said we can actually turn those into on-demand vehicles like Uber or Lyft. You push a button and a transit agency vehicle will come and get you. And then as a next step, that vehicle will either take you to your destination or it will connect you with the fixed route that you need to get to your final destination. And then, oh, by the way, that's like the tip of the spear to then connect every mode of transportation and create a seamless mobility network across the world. That's what we wanted to do. And so how do you get transit agencies that like to tell you they don't have money, even though they do, that are really risk averse, and you're saying, this has never been done before, it's totally new, it's going to transform the way you operate, and the way the public sees you, and the way the public uses you, and hand over money, even though you've never seen it work in the world. Don't you want to be first? Of course they say no to this. So we came up with a different go-to-market strategy. We said, here's what we're going to do. We created this thing called a simulator, where we pump in all this data, and we say, what problem are you trying to solve? And they'll say, well, we got this one route with these 2 big buses that are running around for 10 hours a day, and there's nobody on them. And these buses get 3.5 miles to the gallon, and I've got a driver on there, and it costs me $250,000 a year to service these vehicles, and there's nobody on them. What if we could replace it with an on-demand vehicle? He pushes a button, and that's the only time the vehicle goes out, when someone needs it. So we said, we'll get all this data, and we'll show you a simulation of what's going to happen. So we say, if we put 2 vehicles on that route where there's fixed route now, get rid of that fixed route, put 2 vehicles out there where they push a button, you can run from this time to this time, you could do this number of rides, it'll cost this amount, this will be your savings, all of that. If you put 3 vehicles out there, this is what it'll look like. And they get to basically see the future. So they could say, oh, so if we put 3 vehicles, this is what we can expect to happen with our agency and with our riders. We say yes. And what you should do is don't buy the product right now. Do a pilot for 6 months. And let's see how the real world goes compared to the simulation. Right? And then if that works out, well, then you're going to sign a contract with us long term, and you're going to have lots of vehicles, and you're going to expand, and you're going to take lots of big buses off, and it's going to be huge. Now we're talking millions and millions of dollars for every transit agency. And they like that a lot. They like that a lot. That exploded, right? And that helped us get acquired big time. That's helping to provide more impact in the world than maybe anything else we ever did. It made a lot of money for our salespeople, and it took a lot of time, right? So I don't get the sale for 6 months or a year after I've already been working on this for 6 months. So we have to compensate differently, but thinking longer term, change the trajectory of the company, change the impact we had in the world, and help the company get acquired for a lot of money. Okay? So, your why. Does it align with your company's why? Can you say, my company, their why they exist, how they operate, what they want to do in the world is this, and that matches my why. We are in sync. If not, my why is, why are you there? So give that some more thought, and now I'm happy to answer any questions you may have for me. And yes, I like you. Thank you.